Hello everybody, welcome to Retro Game Super Leagues. I'm Brian, also known as UKGN Zoidberg, and in this episode we're going to be looking at all of the best and worst racing simulators that were released on the Amiga. If this is your first episode of Retro Game Super Leagues, let me just explain a little bit more about what we actually do here. This is based on an idea that first appeared in Amiga Action magazine back just before I started writing for them, where all new games were ranked in one of 14 categories to basically let you see how each game compared to each other nice and easily. In Retro Game Super Leagues, we've got a lot more than 14 categories, as it's not really fair to compare some games to each other. So, for example, this is the racing simulator category, and you can expect to not see games like Lotus or Jaguar in this one, or even games like No Second Prize or Team Suzuki, because bike racing games have their own category as well. So without further ado, let's get on with ranking the 25 racing simulators that I've played. So first up, we have 4D Sports Driving, which is the reason that we are here today. This is the game that I covered on the re-review last Friday. So if you've seen that video, then you'll know a lot of my opinion on this game. Not really that good unless you can play it on a more powerful Amiga. Everything about it is just a little bit too slow and jerky. It has a really nice track editor, which was a nice addition, but it's still fairly limited in terms of what you can actually create. There is a good selection of cars to choose from. I suppose that's a plus. Ultimately, it's in desperate need of a point, because there's not really any reason to play it. There's no competition, there's no challenges, there's no time limits to race against or anything like that. So this one's going to go straight in the rubbish category, I'm afraid. Right down at the bottom. Next, we have another game from Distinctive Software, just like 4D Sports Driving was. This is Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge, which never actually came out in the UK for obvious reasons, seeing as it's based on NASCAR, and that doesn't really have a following in this country, or it certainly didn't way back in 1990 when this came out. It's a fairly detailed simulation of NASCAR racing. The problem there being that I don't really like NASCAR racing. And I find oval circuits incredibly boring to race around. If you are a fan of NASCAR, this will probably be higher up than I'm going to place it. But I'm going to put it in the poor category, because it's not rubbish. It's definitely better than 4D Sports Driving, but I also wouldn't say that it's good either. Next, we have Toyota Celica GT4 Rally, or Celica GT Rally, however you want to name it. This was published by Gremlin Graphics in 1990, right at the height of when they were publishing nothing but great racing games like Supercars, Lotus, Team Suzuki, that kind of thing. This is a excellent and challenging rally game. It allows you to participate in a full career mode or just practice a single rally, and it's got some fantastic weather effects. Having to turn on your windscreen wipers to clear snow and rain off your windscreen was something that I'd never seen in a game before when I first played this one. And I'm definitely going to place this one in the good category, so that's where it's going. Next, we have another NASCAR game, this time Days of Thunder, which is based on the Tom Cruise movie that came out the year before. The movie was considered to be a bit of a box office flop, and the game is not great either, to be honest. It opens with a fantastic rendition of the Hans Zimmer score from the movie, which was arranged by David Whittaker, and that's definitely the best thing about it, though. But the graphics are very slow and basic, and the gameplay is frankly crushingly boring, even more so than Bill Elliott's NASCAR Challenge. So I'm going to, at least that one had a full career mode to play through. I'm going to place this one below that. Next, we have F1, which came out in 1993 from Domark and developed by Lancor. So this is basically a repackaged version of Vroom with double the tracks, even more race options, and better mouse controls. It also has a split-screen 2-play mode, which was a nice inclusion. And everything about it is excellent, to be perfectly frank. I'm going to stick this one straight in the essential category. So make sure you check that one out. 2 years later, Domark followed that one up with the F1 World Championship Edition. This was 1995, this one came out. However, they did change the developer for this one. The developer was Peak Star Software, who had previously made Moonshine Racers and the Amiga version of Road Rash. It's got a certain amount of improvement to the detail in the graphics, but they actually, in my opinion, end up making the visuals worse overall, as the trackside detail doesn't really stand out anymore. It's definitely better than the Mega Drive version though. Still a disappointment overall, but not enough of a disappointment to go too low down the list, so I am actually still going to stick this one in the recommended section. So play the original F1 before you play this one, but this one's still worth a look. Next we have a game called Fastlane, which came out in 1989 from a publisher called Artonic Productions. So yes, this one is incredibly well named because it is a very fast racer, but unfortunately the graphics themselves are an absolute mess, and so actually being able to see the track and navigate around it is virtually impossible. Doesn't help either that when you're actually in the races themselves, that your opposition cars are incredibly wide on screen, and overtaking them is not something that you'll be able to do easily. Really didn't like this game at all, and I'm going to stick this one right down at the bottom of the rubbish category, and it's worse than 4D Sports Driving as far as I'm concerned, so right down at the bottom of the bin you go. Next up we have Ferrari Formula 1, which came out in 1988, published by Electronic Arts, and I actually remember this one being particularly well thought of at the time of its release, and having played it again today, I have no idea why. Fairly nicely presented, certainly when it comes to the management side of things, when you're looking at the pit screens and setup screens and things like that. All that side works quite nicely. Unfortunately, as soon as you get inside of a car and drive, it falls apart completely. The way that your on-screen viewpoint lurches from side to side as you turn around corners makes it practically unplayable, and it made me want to switch it off almost straight away. I'm going to stick this one in the rubbish category as well. I'm going to say it's marginally better than Fastlane, so I'm going to put it there. Next we come to Formula 1 3D, which was developed and published by Simulmondo in 1991, and this one is one of the more genuine surprises on this list, to be honest. It's incredibly fast moving, but I suppose that's because the 3D graphics are actually a little bit basic, but you can just about forgive it because of how much fun it is to play. There is a major lack of trackside detail, which helps to keep the speed up, but what might stop you from playing it is that it does seem to have a complete lack of a learning curve. You're going to be screaming obscenities at the screen pretty much straight away as you try to work out how to drive the cars properly. If you stick with it, it's definitely worth it though. I'm going to put this one in the good category, but I think it's going to go below Celica GT. Next we have Formula 1 Grand Prix, which came out in 1991 and is probably one of the best games ever released on the Amiga. I did actually have it. If you watched my recent Christmas special, the re-review, I did actually have it in my new top 10 games that I would have chosen them in 1992. In 1991, the levels of realism that this game had in it were completely unprecedented, but I mean, they're the kind of things that we take for granted in racing games these days. It was the first game that I can think of that provided assists to the driver, like you can actually turn off and on a racing line on screen and have gear indicators to help you get around the corners at better speed. I also played the two-player mode a lot with my brother back in the day. This was a two-player mode where you would drive for a few laps and then the computer would take over while the second player then played, and it worked really well. And there is, let's face it, nowhere else this game can go other than right at the top of the essential category. Next up we have Grand Prix Circuit, which came out in 1989, and this is another game from Distinctive Software, and this is definitely better than the two we've had so far. Before the release of Jeff Cramman's Formula 1, this was the game for F1 fans, with the sheer number of tracks and cars that you could choose from to race. It's got excellent presentation and the playability is spot on. After you finish playing Formula 1 Grand Prix, you should definitely check this one out as well. But I'm going to stick this one in the good category, and I think I'm going to put it below Formula 1 3D. Next we come to the arcade conversion of Hard Driving, published by Domark in 1989. And if you're going to get somebody to convert a well-known 3D arcade game to the Amiga, then you get the person who made the arcade conversion of Star Wars, and that's exactly what Domark did with this one. The 3D graphics in this one have aged quite well and are a lot smoother than I remember them being. It's all let down though by a very bad selection of control options, whether you play it with the mouse or the joystick or the keyboard. Actually keeping your car on the road and getting around some of the stunts is incredibly difficult to do. Unfortunately, because it's based on an arcade game, it does only have the one track to race around, and that means that it's not got much in the way of lastability. You'll have seen everything that the game has to offer in less than 5 minutes, and there's no real challenge to any of it. So good effort, but could have been better. And I'm going to put this one in the poor category. Next we have Hard Driving 2 Drive Harder, which came out a year later. Basically exactly the same game, same developer. 3D graphics are slightly better than they were, but this is a better game than the first one, but by the simple virtue of the fact that it's got a lot more tracks for you to race around. It even has, on a second disc, a track editor so that you can make your own. It's also way too easy, and sadly it also features the exact same controls that let down the first game. So yes, it's better than Hard Driving, but only just, and therefore still going in the poor category, but above the original. Next we have Highway Patrol 2, which came out in 1989 from French developer Microids. It's an open world racer where you have to find and chase down speeders and give them tickets. Unfortunately, actually keeping the car on the road is virtually impossible because the controls are terrible. So yes, it's quite fast, but I can't recommend that you play it at all. It also doesn't help that it's never really explained how you're supposed to track where your targets are. So I'm going to put this one in the poor. I'm going to put this one in the rubbish category, and I'm going to put it slightly above. I'm going to put it above 4D Sports Driving. Next we have Indianapolis 500, which came out in 1990, published by Electronic Arts and developed by Papyrus Software. It's fast, it's smooth, it's incredibly playable, but everything that I said before about not liking oval circuits, that generally applies to this game as well, and it is an absolute shame that it does only have the one track to race around. Thankfully, it's got a great level of technical detail, and if you do happen to change the settings on your car, they do actually have an effect to how it handles. I can remember when I played this one back in the 90s that I used to have great fun starting a race, spinning around, and then driving the opposite way and crashing into the lead car, and then seeing how many cars I could wipe out and watching it all unfold on the replay mode. Did that many times, probably too many times, and that made it a game that I always loaded up whenever friends came round and we fancied a bit of fun racing. So I'm actually going to stick this one in the recommended section, but I'm going to leave it below F1. Next we have Leading Lap MPV, which even though it came out in 1995, actually looks a lot worse than many of the 3D games on this list. The main selling point when it came out was the fact that you could connect Amigas together and race against your friends, and if you're playing it on an A500 Mini or on emulators, that is no longer the case. I also found it pretty laughable that the on-screen dashboard is exactly the same whether you're driving a rally car or a Formula 1 car. It's got a good sense of speed and plenty of graphic options, but what sinks the entire game for me is just how incredibly boring it is to play. So I'm going to stick this one in the poor category, but I'm going to put it just above the two hard driving games. Next we have Lombard RAC Rally, which came out in 1988, developed by Red Rat Software, who are the same people that went on to make Wild Wheels. I played this one a lot when it first came out, both on the Atari ST and on the Amiga, and the graphics are still excellent all these years later. I still love the animation of the driver, like watching him steer and change gears. The actual gameplay itself is fun and challenging. It's just a little bit of a shame that there aren't more options and stage types for you to race on. That's still going to put it in the recommended section though, and I think I will put this one above Indianapolis 500. Next we have Nigel Mansell's Grand Prix, released in 1988 from Martech, not to be confused with the game that we're going to be talking about next. It's got a surprising amount of depth to the gameplay. with you actually being required to look after your fuel and oil temperatures. Unfortunately, the actual on-screen display shows way too much of your car dashboard with only a tiny little bit at the top for the actual driving. I also found it to be a little bit confusing that it doesn't have a full championship option. It just it's got a lot of tracks to choose from, but all you can do is practice or race or have a single race on each. So the lack of a championship mode is very confusing. I'm going to stick this one in the poor category, and it's going to go below Days of Thunder. So next we have Nigel Mansell's World Championship, which came out in 1992, and this is a much better game than the last one to carry Mansell's name. It's an incredibly well-made racing game that is a lot of fun to play. The main problem is that when it came out, there were already plenty of other better options on the market. That doesn't mean that it's not good. And the fact that the default control method has you holding down the fire button to accelerate rather than pushing up on the joystick was a nice change. And it's also got a really good selection of game modes, including one called Improve with Mansell that gives you tips on how to get better lap times. I'm going to stick this one in the good category, but I think I'm going to put it just below Toyota Rally. Next we have Race Driving, which came out in 1991 from Domark, and this is where they changed the developer. So the same person who made the previous two did not make this one. This was made by Walking Circles, who also did APB. It's simultaneously better and worse than the two hard driving games. It's worse because the 3D graphics are a lot worse on this one, with many parts of the scenery constantly popping in and out of view, and it makes navigating the track a lot more difficult than it should be. And it's better because the controls and the challenge are much more satisfactory. So still not great, but definitely better than the previous two, and I'm going to put this one right at the bottom of the good category. Now we come to Stunt Car Racer, which was also developed by Jeff Crammond, just like Formula 1. And this has always been one of my favourite racing games on the Amiga. It's got a fantastic engine noise that really helps to sell the power of the car that you're driving. And learning the tracks and where you can gun it and when you can't is a lot of fun, and always has been. Actually being able to see all 8 of the tracks is immensely tough, but also incredibly fun. Yes, it's not quite as good as it was back in the day, but I'm still going to stick this in the recommended category. And I think I'm going to put it above F1 World Championship Edition. Next we have Test Drive, which came out in 1987, and this is also from Distinctive Software, published by Accolade. This was the first game that I can remember where I was able to drive real-world sports cars at high speed on the open road, and driving those glossy sports cars along the mountain road that the game provided you was a hugely enjoyable experience. And the fact that you're racing through traffic as well gave it a great sense of danger. I also liked the fact that when you reach the end of the levels and reach the petrol stations, the way that the petrol station attendant mocks your performance if you weren't good enough really does make you want to do better next time. I'm going to stick this one in the good category, and I'm going to put it just above Grand Prix circuits, I think. And then next we come to Test Drive 2 The Duel, which came out 2 years later in 1989, and this one does only have 2 cars for you to race in, but should you start including all the data discs that came out, you can actually end up with more cars than you had in the original Test Drive, including all 5 that were in the original. Yes, it's got a lot of cars. It's also got a lot more locations that you can race in. You can now also race against other computer-controlled drivers rather than just racing against the clock. But one of the big changes to the gameplay was the fact that you actually have to slow down and stop at the petrol station yourself rather than the game doing it for you. And losing a life because you didn't quite stop in time was always a little bit frustrating. Not enough to knock the entire game down. I'm going to put this one in the good category as well. Definitely better than the original Test Drive. In fact, I'm going to put it at the top of the good category, so that goes above Toyota Rally. Next, we come to Vector Championship Run, released in 1991. Unfortunately, despite having some very fast and smooth 3D graphics, there's simply no way that I can recommend this one, as the mouse controls are absolutely terrible. They just feel way too sensitive. You can start moving it a little bit and then you'll suddenly turn a lot. It makes it almost impossible to learn. According to the instructions, you can use a joystick control instead, but I couldn't work out how to do that. So a bit of a shame, as there was a lot of potential with this one. But there is nowhere else I can put it other than the poor category, unfortunately. It is, however, better than Leading Lap, so I'm going to put it right above that one. And then finally, we come to Vroom, which, as I said earlier, is pretty much the same game as F1, and it plays just as well. Unfortunately, it has some very strange mouse controls where you actually wheel the mouse forward to accelerate rather than hold a button, and I could never really understand why that would be, why anybody thought that would be workable. When you play it in arcade mode, though, that's not the case. And arcade mode is hugely enjoyable and absolutely the best way to play the game. Playing a mode where success is determined by how many cars you overtake rather than the position that you finish means that you've always got something to aim for. And the fantastic use of sound really does help to convey the speed that you're travelling at. So definitely still going to be recommended. And I'm going to put this one above Stunt Car Racer. So there you go, that's 25 racing simulators ranked from best to worst. As always, this list only contains games that I have actually played, so if there's a game that I've missed off, that will be the reason why. So please do tell me which games I should have been playing and should have also included. You can also find this Super League over on the Tier Maker website if you want to rank the games yourself and then show me your ranking over on social media. I'd really like to see that. Please, as always, comment and let me know what I got right and what I got wrong. And I will see you all on the next one. So until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.